Part 4. You will hear a biology student giving a presentation about the history and science of coffee. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. For my presentation today, I'm going to be talking about a commodity that many of us rely on to start our day: coffee. It is the second most heavily traded global commodity, surpassed only by crude oil. But despite its ubiquity in our modern lives, the biological and historical journey of the coffee bean is quite complex and full of surprising details. Let's start with the origins. While we often associate coffee with South America or Italy, the story actually begins in the Horn of Africa. Specifically in Ethiopia, there is a famous legend dating back to the 9th century about a goat herd named Kaldi. He noticed that after eating the berries from a certain tree, his goats became so energetic that they did not sleep at night. He reported his findings to the abbot of the local monastery, who made a drink with the berries and found that it kept him alert during the long hours of evening prayer. The knowledge of the energizing berries began to spread, moving east to the Arabian Peninsula. By the 15th century, coffee was being grown in the Yemeni district of Arabia, and by the 16th century, it was known in Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. It wasn't just consumed in homes, but in public coffee houses. These places became hubs for the exchange of information. When coffee finally reached Europe in the 17th century, these coffee houses quickly became centers of social activity and communication. In England, for instance, they were often referred to as penny universities, because for the price of a single penny, the cost of a cup of coffee, one could sit and listen to the leading minds of the day discuss politics, science, and literature. Now, moving on to the biology of the plant itself. What we call a coffee bean is actually a seed. It is found inside a bright red fruit, which is botanically classified as a cherry. The coffee plant is a woody, perennial evergreen that belongs to the Rubiaceae family. There are over 120 species of coffee, but only 2 are commercially significant: Coffea arabica and Coffea canephora, commonly known as Robusta. Arabica is the more popular of the 2, accounting for about 60 to 80% of the world's coffee production. It is generally considered to have a superior, smoother flavor profile with notes of fruit and sugar. However, it is an incredibly delicate plant. It requires specific conditions to grow. Specifically, it thrives at a higher altitude, usually between 600 and 2,000 meters above sea level. It also requires a temperate climate and doesn't tolerate frost. Robusta, on the other hand, is much hardier. As the name suggests, it is robust. It can grow at lower elevations and in hotter climates. It has a stronger, more bitter taste, often described as grain-like or rubbery. Interesting from a biological perspective, Robusta plants possess a much higher concentration of caffeine, almost double that of Arabica. This is actually a natural defense mechanism for the plant, as the caffeine acts as a pesticide, highly toxic to bugs and insects that might try to eat the leaves. Once the coffee cherries are harvested, they must be processed to extract the beans. There are 2 main methods: the dry method, which is the age-old practice of drying cherries in the sun, and the wet method. In the wet method, the fruit pulp is removed and the beans are placed in large water tanks. Here, they undergo a crucial process of fermentation for 12 to 48 hours. This step helps to remove the layer of mucilage, a sticky substance still attached to the parchment skin. This phase is critical because if it continues for too long, it can completely ruin the flavor of the final coffee. Finally, I want to discuss the current threats to coffee production. Climate change is the major concern. As temperatures rise, the specific band of land around the equator, known as the coffee belt, is shrinking. But perhaps the most immediate biological threat is a fungal disease known as coffee rust. This disease attacks the leaves of the coffee tree, preventing photosynthesis. It forms orange powdery spots on the underside of the foliage, eventually killing the tree. It caused the devastation of the coffee industry in Sri Lanka in the 19th century and remains a huge problem today. Another issue is the shift in farming methods. Traditionally, coffee was shade-grown, meaning it was planted under a canopy of larger trees. This mimicked the natural habitat of the plant. However, to increase yields, many farmers have shifted to sun-grown coffee, which requires clearing forests. While this produces more beans in short term, it requires vastly more water and fertilizer. Conversely, returning to shade-grown methods promotes biodiversity, providing a safe habitat for migratory birds and natural predators for pests, which in turn reduces the need for chemical pesticides. So the next time you sip your morning latte, remember that you are drinking the result of a complex biological process and a history that spans continents.
That is the end of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 4.